Okay, we're going to start this project by double clicking the primitives project, and inside that project we're going to go ahead and select the cylinder base shape here. I'm going to pull up our Gizmo 3D, and from the front rotate it 90 degrees like so, and turn out perspective. Let's go ahead and switch to the ZModeler brush, hover over an edge, insert it selected, select multiple edge loops, and make sure the specify elevation here is checked. Give ourselves a few poly loops there. And next we're going to uncrease it because I don't want to play with creases just yet. Next we're just going to unmask the bottom portion, center the gizmo, and scale outward like so, forming the base of our lantern here. I just pulled it upwards with the mask still on to create that little bevel there. Unmask this portion, and I'm going to scale downwards like so. I'm going to do the same for this portion here. Center and scale inwards, and we're just going to do the same for this portion as well. And just like that, you can create a rounded shape just with masking and scale. Just going to unmask the bottom again, scale that out, and we got a decent start to the base of this lantern here. Next, let's go ahead and append another cylinder. Just going to move it upwards in our viewport. I'm going to duplicate this a couple more times because we're going to need several cylinders to build out this lantern. Alright, and just getting this into location. It's going to be the portion above the base where the wick is inserted to. Just going to unmask the top of this cylinder, scale things down a bit, and I'm just eyeballing these proportions. I'm sure they're not too accurate. We'll address that later on. With the top portion of this unmask, I'm going to control click drag, then release and drag, and you'll duplicate those spans in the middle just there. Now a scale and a squash, create a bit of a edge here, a bit of a lip. I'm just adjusting the height and expanding the length of my subtools here, and placing that piece in order. Now onto another cylinder. This one will form the glass, I want to say bulb, but container the fire will be in. I'm just scaling at the roughly fit the base we just created. Next, let's go ahead and click on the gear icon and click the taper deformer, and just pull on the top and bottom here. Just trying to see what type of transition we can get. Playing with this white cone here will round certain portions. Trying to see what I can do about getting a slight bulge towards the center. Just hit reset just then. Just going to pull the top and adjust the bulge like so. I think I'll start with the bottom. Pull it out a little bit. Do this in two portions. Hit accept. And then we'll just click the gear icon again. Go back into taper. Pull out the top portion, top cone, and click accept. Just reposition a bit here and scale up as well. Next, I'm going to go back in with the ZModeler brush, and with edge highlighted, I'm going to alt click to delete that edge, switch to bevel, and give a little bevel on this top edge. Alright, think that's good for now. Let's go ahead and switch to another cylinder. Just going to move it up, place it right on top of that glass portion there. I'm just going to scale it down to kind of meet the width of that subtool. And now with wireframe visible here, I'm just going to unmask the bottom portion there. Stretch the top portion upwards. Alright, I'm just trying to create a large span of a poly loop here to use the next ZModeler brush. Inside insert, we're going to switch to interactive elevation now. And now as we drag upwards, we create inserts, and left and right will control the curvature of our spans. Now, this is working out well. However, I do want a portion of the bottom to remain as it is here. So I'm just going to switch our mode back to single edge loop, insert that, highlight, go back to multiple edge loops, and resume our concave insert here. Just trying to pick the right amount of loops, similar to our current spans here. Alright, that's a nice fast detail you can add on your poly loops. And so I'm just unmasking this portion and stretching it upwards, just loosely eyeballing our reference here. Just trying to get the curvature and the contours of the shapes I'm seeing. So I'm going to unmask this portion right here, just a couple of edge loops. Center my Gizmo 3D and scale outwards, and then squash downwards. Alright, and that's sort of the shape I want here, this flared out portion I'm seeing in the reference. Just going to unmask this portion here and pull things downwards just to flatten out that top portion a bit more. And even though this is relatively similar shaped items from top to bottom, you get a lot of use out of just masking, moving, and a couple of ZModeler features here. And that's pretty much how this creation of this asset will go. Okay, we'll switch from a couple of different tools here and there. I'm just scaling down, once again, just focusing on the contour of these shapes I'm seeing here. We can always slide things up and down, scale them inwards and outwards when we come back to adjust. Doing a bit more beveling here on the top. Unmask that top portion, and I just want to pull it upward to increase the size of that bevel. Okay, just like that. Pull it upward just a bit more. I think we're happy with that. Once again, just reminding myself not to focus too much on any edges. Now I'm just turning on radial symmetry on the y-axis. I'm going to start off with 4 radial, see if that works. I want to use ZModeler, alt click and drag to select. Make sure I have ZModeler selected. I have the clay brush selected. I'm using hotkeys. So there we go. Just alt click and drag. And now select inset on the face options, polygon options, and just inset that temporary selection. Alright, now we can temporary select with alt click and drag again. Go back to Q mesh to perform a extrusion inward towards our mesh. And a little inset there. Okay, let's zoom out. See how our piece is looking. Let's go to our next cylinder piece here. I'm just going to move that all the way to the top. And next, as usual, scale it down to meet the width of the piece underneath, as this is all connected. Most of this is likely maybe 4 pieces, probably welded together in reality, probably, maybe more. Now I'm examining the reference here, and I've come to the conclusion we can start off with a better shape. Clicking the gear icon, I'm gonna click the sphere 3D from the modifier section. I'm gonna rotate it 90 degrees holding shift. And then next, I'm gonna grab one of these cones here, pull upwards to create, say, a third of a sphere. And then scale it upwards. And it gives us a nice cap shape to work with. Alright, now we have that all set. Go ahead and perform some edits on the cap shape here. I'm going to go ahead and create an inset in here. First thing we need to do is go ahead and alt click on polygons, select all of these, highlight a polygon, click inset, and drag inwards. And this happens on caps sometimes. You can't insert a poly loop without creating a inset. Okay, so now we can just go ahead and click insert and create multiple edge loops with the multiple edge loop option selected. I'm just going to select all of these, holding alt and dragging across the polygons, even this ring as well. And we're going to go to Q mesh to go ahead and extrude that temporary selection outward. Okay, and along the edge I'm going to insert some poly loops. As you know, the more you use ZModeler, the last action for each component is what you'll have active. Okay, that's looking pretty decent. Now let's go ahead and unmask this portion here. I want to create a bit of a lip, a bit of an edge. Just going to center that and scale out. And over time you can see you can get a lot done with just masking and moving. And every option doesn't require you to find the equivalent within the ZModeler actions. I'm just moving this portion of geometry to kind of reflect the reference just a bit better. It's nice steep of a lip here. Just playing with these poly loops by masking and unmasking and moving things around. And push that downwards. Okay, let's go ahead and move on from here. Back to the base here. I'm just going to unmask. And this time around, we just want to go ahead and tweak all those proportions of all these pieces that we've added. So I'm just unmasking. And I'm scaling downwards. But a portion of it I want to unmask and scale back outwards. Try to keep that consistent. And I'm just going to squash that upwards just to slim it down some. And I'm just eyeballing our reference here. Let's go into insert, delete those loops as I didn't really need them, and pull this upward some. And I could leave that little indentation there. We'll just scale that out a bit down, give us a nice solid base. Okay, just placing my gizmo at the top here. And I'm going to scale the whole thing down some. Okay. And we could honestly spend as much time as you want eyeballing these proportions just by sight, but it's a better idea to likely use a reference image like the one we have on screen. We're going to do that in just a moment. Just scaling these couple down by using the multi-select. Okay. And now with that into place, let's go ahead and go into our draw menu. I'm going to expand that, click on map, and I'll load up the image of the lantern. Let's go back to the draw menu, play with the shading here, and scroll back down to the draw menu, play with the vertical and the horizontal offset. Try to line things up, as well as the scale, like so. Mine looks a bit thin in comparison, but we can begin our edits here. I'm just going to place my Gizmo 3D, and I'm just going to scale it back up a bit. Seems like the approach to take here. It's like a bit of it is still masked, noticing, but we'll adjust that as well. Let's go to the base, unmasking the bottom, and just moving things upward to kind of link up with the reference. Let's go ahead and move. You see that portion that's masked? Let's go ahead and clear that. Next, let's go ahead and line up the base of our 3D object here with that base there. And I'm just adjusting this under portion like so, pulling it upwards. And I'm just going to pull things down just a bit more. Occasionally I'll just wiggle things out of placement just to see the reference a bit better. And this also shows the importance of having reference images, especially for nailing these proportions. You save a lot of time having decent reference images, especially from front views for stuff like this. I'm just finagling a bit more on this piece. Next, let's move on to the glass jar. Just going to center our Gizmo 3D and reset the rotations. Bring things down. Place my Gizmo 3D at the bottom so I can scale it upwards from there. Alright, got that into place. I want to play with the curvature of this glass jar a bit, so I'm going to unmask the center portion. Next, I'm going to go ahead and open up the masking menu and perform a blur. And then I'm going to scale things out a bit. And it's not perfectly centered in our reference, but I am getting a decent bulge. Just blur that mask a bit. And we're getting a nice bulge. Alright. Tops and bottoms need a bit of smoothing, so I'm going to go to my deformation and try polish by features. Instead, let's try polish by groups. Let's go to contrast. Instead, let's just work it by hand. Center my Gizmo 3D and just manually scale after a blur. I've hotkeyed masking, blurring my mask, so I'll be doing that as we go along as well. Okay, on this piece I have radial symmetry still activated, so we can turn that off for the time being. And I'm just gonna center my Gizmo 3D in its rotations and pull it downward like so. And just unmasking. Something satisfying about this part of just lining things up and getting those shapes just right. Just editing your geometry. Can't explain what it is, but it's a relaxing situation. Occasionally blurring my mask, so I'll get a smoother transition when manipulating these pieces here. As you see, I turn on polyframe, I can still see through to my reference and line things up. Okay. And my ideal is somewhere in the 85 to 90% accurate. So I'm not trying to get it super close, but relatively close within reason. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and move this piece downward like so and scale it up some. Try to line up with our reference image. Down to this piece, just nudging things around. Need to pull this edge in a bit. It's a bit too big. So I'm just going to unmask the edge, scale it inward like so, making sure Gizmo 3D is centered. Okay, just looking at it, maybe I should unselect that very bottom poly loop for a better transition. Okay, so now let's go ahead and scale down like so. And I'm only paying attention to the left side of our reference. I know it's symmetrical, even though it doesn't line up with the reference perfectly. Okay. Make sure you unmask the right portion when we're manipulating. Alright, just turned off the floor. Turn off my reference image for the moment. Just checking and see how things are looking. Still working with perspective off, which is ideal for this kind of asset. Okay. Just looking at my edge here and realizing I have some of that geometry embedded in that glass. So I'm just unmasking and scaling, trying to form a nice lip over the top of the glass jar here. Just unmasking that bottom portion. Control click and drag to extrude. And then I'm just scaling to form a slight bevel around the top there. Okay. Alright. Next, we're going to go ahead and append a plane 3D. Okay. Next, I'm going to go ahead, scale down and open the geometry palette. And next, click this reconstruct subdiv, which will undivide your geometry, also generating subdivision levels. So it's like subdividing backwards. So now I can manipulate this simple shape here with the amount of size I need. And now with this shape, I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees like so, and move it out to the side. And now I'm just going to scale it down in reference, and this will form the rails, the thicker rails that form the outside of the lantern here. So I'm just going to alt click to grab all those and use Q mesh to extrude upwards. So now let's add some spans in here, some poly loops with the insert, multiple edge loops. Just add plenty to make sure I have enough resolution. Then I'm going to uncrease. Let's move it into position, gear, click bend curve, and grab and drag this cone to add more points to manipulate. So I'm going to turn our reference back on with the floor button. And as I'm manipulating this, I'm realizing our tube is a bit on the thick side, so I'll scale things back down and back to the gear, and it's changing. So let's go ahead, hit accept, go back into bend curve. Sometimes you can't make edits once you enter the modifier. You have to make certain edits before you enter a modifier. So now I'm just pulling these points to get the general shape, and not many is needed for this, like so. And you can do as much detail as you want on that portion before manipulating it. Add all kinds of details and then do this. You can still perform it afterwards, especially if you're using the ZModeler brush. I'm just adding a few more spins by pulling on that orange cone at the top, and we can really get some more in-depth edits, especially around the curved portions. Okay, it's mostly where you'll need it. Go to the gear icon, click accept, and there's that left side rail. I'm going to go into geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld across the X axis. And that part is blocked out. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Next, using the Move Infinite Depth brush, just make a few minor tweaks to the contours of that rail and just see how things are looking a bit. Make sure they're nice and solid before moving on. Click append. Now we're going to go ahead and grab another cylinder 3D. I'm going to scale it down, move it upwards, zoom in a bit, stretch it, and then I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to use this to make the handle. You can see from the reference image on screen. I'm going to add a few more spans or poly loops before we do that. So I'm going to come into geometry. I'm going to subdivide twice. And delete our subdivisions. Next, I'm going to go ahead into bend curve. And I'm going to turn on symmetry. That bottom cone there, you can see it works. You have to make sure you choose the right axis with that bottom cone. And now I'm just moving these points into place to kind of fill out the shape of our handle here. So I have an idea of what I'm going for. Keep in mind we can always add more points by pulling on that top cone there. And just take your time and kind of form the handle shape. Continue to nudge these into place. Bend curve is definitely a must-use feature in ZBrush. Definitely one of the better additions. Okay, I think that looks like a nice, comfortable handle to hold. Okay, so just a few points, especially around the curves. Looks good. Let's go to the gear icon and click accept. All right, there's our handle. It does look a little thin, so I'm just gonna control click and drag the scale icon to inflate just a little bit more. All right, and that should do it for our handle for now. Later on, we'll come back and add a bit more subdivision. Now let's go ahead and click append, add another cylinder 3D. You could have guessed any other shape at this point. Just rotate it 90 degrees and stretch it a bit more. Move it upwards. I'm just going to set this at the top here. I'm going to add another little hook. And this hook would be used if they wanted to place it on a hook, I should say. So we'll create a nice little loop that can be placed on a hook. Alright, so let's go ahead and click append. This time we're going to grab a ring 3D. Go to the ring in our subtool list. Move it upwards. And we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. Holding shift to snap. Scale it into place. Now this is a bit on the thick side, so I'm going to use the deformations to thin it down using a negative contrast slider, like so. Move it downwards right into that cylinder we added. Now, just like before, I'm going to use the Move Infinite Depth brush to shape the new loop we added here. Now things are getting deflated a bit towards the bottom here as we manipulate things. We can come back and add that. Just add a general inflate and leave that for now. Next, let's go ahead, open up our subtool palette, click append, and select another ring 3D. Select and move it upwards. And these are going to form those wires wrapped around the glass jar in the center there. Open up our floor and just get things into position. And just like before, open up the deformations. Slide that contrast slider in a negative direction a couple of times just to get the thickness, like so. Scale things out a bit more, like so, just to fit around, just around that glass jar. Okay. Just kind of nudge it into place with the Gizmo 3D. Make sure that's centered by clicking that GPS icon. Okay, next I'm just move it off to the side, lower our focal shift, and use the gizmo deformation and kind of tug this downward. Okay, like so. I'm just gonna move it inside, kind of embedded. Just pull it downward. I'm gonna do the same over here. Really handy for making kind of smooth deformations. The size of its influence is kind of tricky, so that's something to be aware of. Okay, it seems to be pretty nudged. I'm just using the red scale, kind of lengthen it, then inflate it by holding control as we do. Bit of polish by features. And I'm scaling it out some more. Just trying to make sure it hugs that jar as much as possible. Okay. And now I'm just going to go ahead and grab that Move Infinite Depth brush again. And just bring things down a bit more. There we go. These wires kind of have maybe like a hand bend, like it was probably bent by hand. Okay. And this is a good reason to make sure you have reference of your subject from various angles. It wasn't until I found another picture of a lantern, like from an angle on screen, it shows that these wires actually bend into the base, or generally downwards. So I'm just hiding the selection tools, and I hit delete hidden, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn on double in the display properties. Now switching to my ZModeler brush, hover over the edge right at the end there, and I'm going to go to close, and I'm just going to go ahead and click on the edge, open edge there, and that'll generate triangles. But if we go back and select convex hole, we'll get the chance to add loops. All right, And it seemed to did that on both sides for me. And now we got that closed. I went ahead and polygrouped everything to the same polygroup. I'm just gonna go ahead and control click and drag that unmasked edge. And now I'm just going to perform a manual extrusion just by eyeballing it and twisting and rotating and continuously just moving around the base here. Control click drag any of the white corners or any arrow as well. Just gonna undo that one, or those two, because it wasn't quite on in position. Alright, and could have probably used the bend curve, but that tends to work only when things are straight and curving things. So, or maybe a move brush as we are now, but it's hard to keep your loops consistent with the brush as well. So kind of a pick your poison means of extending. So many ways to do things inside of ZBrush. Half the time I just find myself doing the first thing that comes to mind, and occasionally thinking of a better way later. Okay, that's good. We only need to do the 1/2. We can go into modify topology, switch to the Z axis, and hit mirror and weld like so. Okay, and as you guessed it, we're gonna go ahead and actually I'm gonna undo that and offset that because it was merging. I didn't want it to quite weld together right there because there seems to be a bit of a gap in the reference. So I want to kind of follow that and just offset it a bit and go back and perform a bit of a polish to smooth things out before we go ahead and re-mirror and weld. Okay, that's better. And now we can go into our subtools, duplicate that back into geometry. Actually, what we need for this isn't mirror weld, but just to mirror it. So open deformations, hit the Z axis, and then click mirror. Okay, actually let's go with the X axis and hit mirror. There we go. And now it's kind of intersecting with the original. Just turn off mirror, and I'm just going to pull that forward so they're not kind of intersecting each other. Just using the move brush, alt clicking to move in the surface direction. Okay, and I'm just going to embrace the handmade look. And in the future, we're going to push that further, make it look a bit more regular. I'll go ahead and append a cube now. And we're going to turn our focus shift back to 0. Or negative 100, I believe that is. Scale this rectangular piece into position. Form this little, I guess, a locking mechanism for this wire that interacts with the wick in there. So I'm just kind of scaling this out like so, and from the side just scale it down, fit right inside, extend it a bit just to make sure it's embedded in there, won't have any gaps. Center my Gizmo 3D. Click the gear icon and click taper. And now I'm just going to kind of pull on one cone here adjust that white cone, get a nice angle, and play with the y-axis cone to affect the depth like we did there. And it kind of looks something like that to me. Click the gear, intercept. Okay, and we got this in place. Let's turn on our floor and look at the hole we need to cut out. So step back a little bit here and look at our geometry. And instead, we're just going to go ahead and play with our visibility, because I want to make sure we see our poly loops here. Okay, I think we got the best we can get here. All right, so instead, what we're going to do is kind of line up our loops to meet the edges of these gaps here. We're going to cut. Next, I'm going to go ahead into the transform menu, turn on symmetry, select Z. We might not actually need this, but see if it works. I'm going to switch our floor on, and with our ZModeler brush, I'm just going to hold Alt and quick select these faces here. The ones we'll be subtracting, like so. Turn off the floor, hover over a polygon, and use Q mesh to negative extrude them, as well as delete. So kind of bridged it, sort of. And now with that portion unmasked, I'm just going to slide these points into place just to kind of line it up. Looks a little bit better. So I'm just masking and nudging like so, and just using these primitives. This can be a relatively simple task to kind of block out these geometric items, props and things like that. Okay, go ahead, center that, slim it down a bit, and I think that's mostly it. Slim it down a bit more. Yeah. At some point, we'll come back and smooth out a lot of these pieces here. Just going to turn on the floor, and I want to insert or select the edge here with the Alt click. I'm going to go ahead and actually insert a loop here because it doesn't come all the way down to the edge. There's a little extra joint here. I want to extrude. So I'll just select these, extrude, like so. And I'm just lining things up and scaling things down. I'm going to place my Gizmo 3D here and just rotate outwards to line up with that extra little extrusion there that's in the reference. And this looks like it has a bit of a taper. Any little extra bit I can easily get in here to make it look less flat, I guess, or more interesting. I'm just gonna take right from the reference. Go ahead and insert another, or appended another cylinder 3D. Just rotating it. I'm going to use that to create this extra wire going from side to side of the main rails and up and through the wick compartment there. Okay, so first thing first, before we deform this, to make sure we have enough loops or geometry. Let's go ahead and turn off the creases, or turn on the creases I should say. Clicking the crease buttons will apply creases to the edges, keeping them nice and tight. I'm going to subdivide a few times, scale it down a bit. Alright, let's go ahead and with the bend deformer, bend curve, let's go ahead and manipulate these points to line up relatively with the reference here. Just placing them, we'll redistribute them many times before we conclude, but just try to get something in place. The more of these you cluster around corners, you'll be able to get tighter corners. So it's a really easy, super handy feature to become familiar with. Okay, just like that. Move these here, just like that. We got the majority of this lined up. Just have to handle this top part. This thing's a curve into another direction. A bend curve doesn't work well in multiple directions. It doesn't often curve that great, but it might work fine with things that are just as wide as they are tall, like this piece. If it was like a flat piece, yeah, they don't turn in multiple directions that well. So I'm just going to move some of these points up towards the end here, just so I can have enough to curve it. Like I said before, bending with bend curve only works with shapes that are equally wide as they are tall. So I'm just gonna finish the rest with masking and moving. Just blurring my mask and just manipulating this to form some kind of curve. Side here, just offsetting and twisting. Okay. Just unhid everything to see how it looks. I feel like this should be pulled forward some. I'm going to switch to the mask lasso. Like so. Alright. I'm going to place my Gizmo 3D here and then rotate it forward so that it's outside that rail. It's still between the little locking mechanism that we created. I'm just going to manipulate the wire to fit our limitations here. I don't think it'll take too much from the reference there. Pull it upwards like so. Like I said, you could left your wire as plain as possible or as curvy as you want. All these parts will work out as much time as you put into them. So just take your time and figure out what parts need the attention. Just hit that with a little inflate. Okay, I think we're just about done with this. It definitely need to be smooth in the future. Bit more of that move brush. Okay, just continue to move around and make sure things look all right. I just went ahead and subdivided it twice because I want to continue to bend this. I just blurred and inverted the mask. Now instead of using the move brush, I'm just going to place the gizmo 3D. I'm going to adjust its focal shift by holding space bar and lower it, or increase it I should say, to a high value, something 90 or higher. Blur the mask a bit more and line up the item in the viewport and just rotate after offsetting the gizmo 3D. Depending on where you place it, it depends on how it will rotate or manipulate in general. Okay, so it's really handy. You can really do some easy or quick manipulations that will be probably a little bit more complicated otherwise. Okay, really handy feature. Scaling as well, that mask still on. Okay, let's go next into deformations. I'm gonna try polishing things a bit, see how that looks. Try open circle. Usually I'll try open circle. That's a more aggressive version. All right. Now I'm just stretching it along. Want to come back to this and give it another pass. Felt that's a little bit better. A little bit easier for you to grab if you were to interact with it too. Just go ahead and delete lower. Get rid of all those subdivision levels. And next I want to go into ZRemesher. Let that run for a little bit. And now I have better loops along this thing. I don't have any weird stretching like we had before. Alright. Just don't have any real detail to keep. We'll just go ahead and subdivide and get that smoothness back. Next, let's go ahead and append another ring 3D. Select it and rotate. Alright. Let's zoom into this ring here. That polyframe 3D on. I'm just going to hit reconstruct sub div a few times. Delete lower. I'm going to use my selection lasso here to hide this portion. Open modified topology and click delete hidden. Next, I'm going to use a ZModeler and close those holes. Just polygrouped everything. I'm going to unmask this and I'm just going to bend this portion back, and I'm control click and dragging to extrude and creating this additional curved piece of wire. It's kind of sticking right out the front of our reference piece there. Now I couldn't tell you at all what this piece does, but since I see in a couple other pieces, I decided to go ahead and add it. And it kind of starts off with a bit of a spiral on one end, and then it flows into a straight shaft. So I'm just trying to make that transition here by control click and dragging while slowly manipulating, curving the tube here. Okay. And it's possibly one of the quickest ways of doing this. Possibly not the easiest with all the camera rotations, all while trying to keep it smooth. So okay. Alternatively, you could probably have took a straight tube and bent the end into a spiral. But we did the reverse. Took a ring and made a spiral. Okay. Performing a few edits here. Just pulling this part forward a bit. Just blurring that mask a bit more. Definitely affects your transitions. Okay. Let's go ahead and scale it down. Let's move it into position. Rotate. Bring it upwards. Scale it down some more. Okay. Let's unmask this part. Control click, drag. And we're just gonna use ZModeler to add some poly loops. Click insert, multi-edge loops. Click drag. And just try to keep it even. Just polygroup everything with Control W. And next I'm just gonna kind of get it into position. Next, I'm going to go ahead and generate some poly groups on this so we can go ahead and smooth it out. And we're going to do that by opening the polygroups menu and click the group by normals. And by default, it'll work pretty well on a piece like this. So next, I'm going to go into geometry and hit the crease polygroups button to add creases around those. And then subdivide a few times. Smooth out. Alright, now we got that done. I'm going to move on to the base, where in the reference image there's a bit of a spout that's built right into the base. We're going to go ahead and use our ZModeler brush, starting off with the the slide feature, to slide these points to the side here just to create some space, like so. Next, we're gonna go to split, and this is a point action. We're just gonna click and drag to create a circle. Okay. Next, let's alt click to make a temporary selection and Q mesh those polygons downward. Another selection. This time we're going to switch to scale, and I'm just going to scale downward. Switch to polygon center here, and I'll scale it the way we want. Another alt click, temporary selection. Use Q mesh. This time we're just going to control click and drag, and that will duplicate our selection. And we just raise it off the edge just a little bit. Just undo that. Perform that action again, just a bit higher so you can see the split. And once again, that's control, click, and drag to duplicate, to split it off like we did. This time I'm selecting inset to create an inset of that selection. And now with this selected, we're going to go back to Q mesh and extrude upward. What we're doing is creating the spout, portion of the spout, and the cap as well. Okay. You just continue to make multiple selections using that alt click and whatever ZModeler feature you want to use, like so. Just like that, we created our cap. Okay. Move along. We're going to accessorize our lantern a bit here by appending a sphere, and we're going to use this to create the base of a moth, which will be one of many moths. We'll apply it all around our lantern here just to add a bit more depth and interest. So now we have this all scaled up in our viewport here and isolated. Just control click and drag downward, create another segment and another segment of this sphere, all on the same sub tool. I just stretch the bottom portion to create the bottommost section of the moth's body. I want to say abdomen, but I'm not totally sure. That corresponds with their anatomy here. So just playing with the focal shift of the Gizmo 3D, increasing it to like 90 and scaling and create a point there. And as I move my Gizmo 3D, I can play with the angle of that point. I'm going to go back to the head portion, unmask it, then control click and drag to create another sphere, duplicate, scale it down. And from the side profile, I'm just going to get it into place for what will be an eye. And off screen, I have several pictures of moths. They kind of definitely require many angles with their wings in various formations. Once again, using a taper deformation here, kind of create a more of an egg shape for his eye. The idea I have for the moth is to create something kind of on the low res, low detail side, as it will be really small in our scene and most of the details will be lost. But in the future, if we want to add more detailed versions, we can definitely upscale this at a later time if you choose. Just went ahead and mirror and welded that across the x-axis. Now I just went ahead and polygroup both eyes. Next, seeing what to work on here. I'm just going to go ahead and scale up the eyes a bit more. Okay, just a bit more. We can always change it if needed. All right, it's good. I'm constantly looking at my references. I'm gonna go ahead and append a cylinder to our scene. Just go to it, turn off perspective for the moment, stretch out the cylinder a bit, and this will form the antenna. Just gonna taper one end small and the other side wide. Hit accept. All right, and we'll likely need to scale this, but I'm going to get it into place. Scale it down a bit more and just kind of embed it into his head. All right, it's pretty decent. Like I said, nothing super accurate here, just a decent representation of a moth. Just going to subdivide a few times there. Make sure to get rid of those to use the bend curve. Lower those points because that was a lot, and just give it a little bit of a bend, like so. All right, just find a curve you're happy with. Happy with that? Just hit accept. Okay. Keep an eye on this and move it to the side. And then inside of modify topology, once we get this into location, we're just going to go ahead and move that onto the other side. Okay. On the x-axis. Like so. All right, now with the antenna done, just go ahead and reposition and give it a little bit more of a upward angle. There's so many variations of moths. They're really an inspiring subject matter, especially their colors and patterns. Just appended another sphere 3D to our scene. And I went ahead and hid everything else in our sub palette, so that's how we're able to isolate just the moth and any new subtools we add. Okay, so I kind of stretched this sphere here, and this will be one of the segments that will form the moth's legs. And this is the way I normally like to work, starting off with basic geometric shapes, just using them in place to kind of figure out the anatomy and placement and the general shapes needed to kind of block out the forms. Very similar to how you would work, you know, in 2D, just blocking out the general forms before you kind of add more detail, more interest, maybe more realism. Okay, just orienting my gizmo 3D, place it in the center. Then I'm going to hit taper, and I decide to widen the bottom end, hit accept, and squash it down a bit. And keep in mind, I'm using these deformers to do things such as taper, but you could always just simply use a move brush or whatever feature you prefer. Digital art is definitely a love your tools kind of thing. If you find any tools that you particularly love to use them as much as possible. You don't always have to use the latest and greatest, but I would suggest giving it any new tools you haven't played with a chance, because it could just ultimately improve or speed up your workflow. I'm applying a bit more bend curve here because her legs are kind of spindly, very thin as they come to a point almost. Remind me of mosquitoes that way, but that could probably be just most flies. I'm playing with the inflate feature on those points. Okay, just give this leg a bit of a turn, a rotation, kind of orient it. Move that point like so. I think we got this pretty solid in this base form, where we can start to duplicate, create the additional legs. Okay, now I'm just using move brush, a bit of smoothing. Kind of play with the size and transition. More smoothing. Okay. Just check it out from a few angles. All right. Add a bit of inflate here. Felt a bit too thin in that one area. And now we're control clicking, dragging, and placing. All right. Now I'm just going to unmask portion of this using the mask lasso brush. And I'm just rotating them to orient them a bit better. Okay. Unmask this one. And place it like so. Okay. Looks good. A little bit of a rotation. I usually, before I start projects or new assets in the scene or the main asset, I usually study as many or at least a few variations of the item. You kind of come to some generalizations about how they're formed. Just went ahead and mirrored and welded those legs Okay. Trying to figure out our next step. Any critical points that need tweaking in his anatomy and forms. Okay, just pull a portion of the head forward a bit. Just gonna reshape the base of his head a bit. Okay. And now we'll use a multi-select to select the head. I'm just gonna unmask the eyes and head portion. You can control shift and drag to add to your mask or unmask. And now with the multi-select, I'm just going to scale up the head, eyes, and the antenna. Like so. Alright. I want to create a few, kind of a glimpse of detail in the rear portion of his body here. I'm just going to unmask. Trying to see, could possibly do this with the loops. There's a mask feature and the edge features. So I'm just kind of selecting every other loop, trying to keep it consistent. It definitely helps us take advantage of our topology here. Just inverted my selection, and I'm going to control click and drag to create a inset of those loops. Okay. It looks a bit hard edge now, but when we smooth it, it'll look less intense. I'm just going to use my move brush to kind of tweak the contour of our moth's body here. Alright, just kind of bulging up some areas. We're going to add wings, so some of this will be covered, but it's good practice. It's always good practice when you do something for the first time. It'll be the first time I've modeled or sculpted a moth. So, and when I'm ready to take it even further, I'll have a file to come back to add even more details. Okay, I'm just looking at my references and making some observations, things to tweak to make my moth look a bit more moth-like. I'm going to rotate this leg. Always a good idea to continue to spin around your model and look for anything that looks off or wrong or unlike your images. I'm going to pin a plane 3D. I'm going to use this to form our wings. Okay. Just going to move it up into place. Off to the side here. Let's go into geometry. I want less points to manipulate, so I'm going to reconstruct subdiv. Once again, lowering our poly count as well as creating subdivision levels. Now with the move brush, I'm just going to simply push these points and polys around to form something that represents the bigger top wings. Okay. The main wings. Okay. Like something like that. With a larger brush, I'm going to make some larger form shifts. Like so. And now I'm just kind of spacing out these points a bit more. Making sure we don't overlap any points as well. I'm just trying to make the edges somewhat smooth. And then transitions. All right, Let's go ahead and move that upward like so. Next is come down here to duplicate. Move that downwards. Use our scale features to kind of manipulate this. And back to the move brush. Just move it into place. Gizmo 3D before we continue to finalize our shape. And I'm looking at the main reference that I have on screen. And I'm not going to have his rings fully expanded like they are in the image. I want to cover too much of his body. So rearranging things here. After some time, you can hop between both wings, continue to make edits. I'm going to switch to the ZModeler brush. And with insert, I'm going to add a poly loop here. Give us a bit more geometry to work with here. And kind of nail in the shape I want. We could always just subdivide and give ourselves a good amount of additional geometry. All right. Let's go to the body here. Just elongate this portion. Okay. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and switch to another masking brush, the lasso masking brush. Unmask this portion and just scale things down a bit. Just making all kinds of moderate changes here. Just trying to make more of trying to accentuate this little detail here without doing too much. Just masking off each span and scaling down the rest. Let's undo that. Mask off the upper portion and repeat. Once done with those edits, we can go ahead and move on to our geometry palette and subdivide. Add ourselves a bit more geometry. Smoothing things out. And just continue to make any more edits you might see fit. In the side view here, just check things out. Okay, just continue to make any final edits as we work our way towards the end of our low resolution moth here. We're going to activate our ZModeler brush, bring up our menu and select all polys as a target and just extrude it upward using Q mesh. Just go ahead and do that for both wings. And go ahead and subdivide twice to add much more resolution. And now with that resolution, if we want, we can continue to play with the shape of our wings, now using the Move Infinite Depth brush. Now, I haven't said it before, don't pay too much attention to my Z brushes. I have a lot of custom brushes in there, so yours likely won't be as chaotic if you're wondering why it looks so different. You're just playing with any subtle shapes and edits to these wings. Alright, I think we're just about ready to mirror those on over. Alright, just looking at my reference and just making come to some conclusions on how to approach this rear wing here. Alright, let's go into our geometry tab. Let's go ahead to creases, turn off uncrease all, press uncrease all, And after an additional subdivision, I'm going to the deformations and use a negative contrast to smooth out things a bit more and get rid of that hard edge. So repeat the steps of increasing all, back to deformation, negative contrast. Alright, so now it's much thinner. Next, let's move on and delete our subdivision levels and mirror and welding those wings. Okay. Now with that all set up, just come to the head here after isolating with our selection tools. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete lower and then split hidden. This will split into its own subtool. So now I can manipulate it using the Move Infinite Depth Brush from the profile view. And kind of get something up. Once again, look a bit more moth-like, at least in profile. Okay. And like I said, this is all good practice, even though this won't be seen all that much at a moderate distance, since they're small. Okay. But I do want to make sure I get enough of the major forms to resemble its subject matter. See, I have transparency on with the ghost mode. That's the way I like to use it. Okay. I think that's pretty good. If you're like me, you can continue to make final tweaks hours and hours into it until you ultimately have nothing left to do. But like I said, this needs and or will remain a low res asset. Okay, now let's go ahead and merge all the pieces of our moth together into one subtool. And next we're going to duplicate that subtool and move it upwards. We're going to edit its wings so we'll have something that looks like two versions of a moth. This will help us a bit in the placement of our moth. Just placing a mask, blurring it so I'll get a nice smooth transition when I come to rotate them. I need to mask off the rest of his body as well, so I'm just going to hide those and now rotate like so. Let's blur it a bit more, and there we go. Now we get a nice good second view or alternative moth for placing on our lantern here. Now let's go ahead and unhide the rest of our lantern along with the moth pieces we created. I'm going to use a multi-select. I'm going to select both of our moths. And now with them both selected, I'm just going to move them all to the side. Scale them down a lot. Trying to get them, let's turn off symmetry. And just try to get them in scale with the lantern here. Even smaller. So I want them to accentuate the lantern, but I don't want them to dominate it. Which is another reason we didn't go heavy on the moth details here. Okay. So those are all ready for placement when we're ready. I want to perform a few more edits on our lantern before we start to place these all the way around it. Okay, so they'll be coming up in a bit. Now let's continue to add some details as we move along here. To apply some creasing to this handle as well as a few subdivision levels. The creasing mostly applies to the edges. I'm going to hit the crease button here. Once again, that's just applying a default 45-degree value of creases, along with some subdivisions. Okay, just to add more resolution. Applied another set of creasing to this, and then subdivide a few times. And I'm actually going to go ahead and undo that. I want to apply some manual creasing, this time with the ZModeler brush. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. Over our edge, we're going to go ahead and select crease, and also select edge loop complete, and just click on the edge loop, or edge ring I should say, and you'll see the crease line applied to that edge ring. Now subdivide, and we should see these areas tighten or stay sharp as we subdivide. Okay, so you see some of these areas stay sharp. Let's go back to our base here, and in my transforms I'm going to enable radial symmetry on the y-axis with a count of 4. That was, and I'm just going to perform a bit of an inset to add a little bit of detail here with a temporary selection. Alright, and perform that inset. Another selection, this time switch to Q mesh. Let's undo that and switch back to single poly, the default target, and push that in like that. Subdivide to see what it looks like. Okay, that's cool. Let's come down here, insert edge loop. Let's undo that. I'm trying to just insert a single loop, so switch to single loop like so, and now I can go back to multi-edge with that interactive elevation, create a nice rounded kind of bump there around the edge. Alright, now let's go on and move to the next piece. I'm going to apply the same creasing, subdivide a few times to see what we get. And kind of a uneven surface on the top there. See if we can troubleshoot this with some creasing. Apply it around these inner edges here. I'll tighten things up. And make sure they're going all the way around the edge ring you want. Okay, not quite yet. Let's do these inside corners here as well. Clicking to apply a crease to these edges. Alright, and I have that radial symmetry on, so that was for every inset. Almost. We'll definitely troubleshoot this. Come back to that. Just going to continue to apply some creases here and there. Insert an edge right at the bottom here, one here, which is another way of controlling your edges. Placing individual edges on both sides of a edge will tighten it, but the distance between the edges will control the softness. So it's another way to control your transition of your edges, just by inserting additional edge loops. And you see that certain softness. Alright, continue to add creases, which is the faster way to go about it. Alright, come to insert, and now I'm just switching between using insert and creases depending on how soft of an edge I want. If I want a super sharp edge, I'll just use creases, but if I want a softer edge, I'll just use additional edge loops. Just going to subdivide these wires here, and these as well. Okay, the edge looks a little funny there, but that's mostly embedded in the handle or those rails. Okay, I have something odd going on. I'm just going to grab my Move Infinite Depth brush, size it up, and just pull that inwards. Possibly re-dynamesh or dynamesh it and smooth it out if we need it. I'm just going to use the Move brush to just nudge things around to add that irregularity that is present in the reference, as well as some of the off-screen references I have. Just add a bit more irregularity and realism. You could do this all around in places you want, maybe a few dents in the rails, places that might bump up to something or is touched often, perhaps some scratches. All sorts of details you can add to this after this point to help tell the story and just add some visual interest and contrast. Model, a lot of times, is kind of half the battle of kind of bringing it to life. So now I'm just subdividing this piece a couple of times here. Like so. I'm just going to add some edge loops here and there. I'm starting to prefer just inserting additional edge loops because super sharp edges aren't truly realistic, but if you're in a pinch, you can always come back and just apply some version of polish, deformation, maybe some masking to control where you place it. There's all sorts of ways to develop your workflow in ZBrush. Alright, still applying smoothing between these subtools, making sure they look relatively decent up close. Coming up in here, I'm gonna hit this edge with a bevel. Okay, back to insert. And we see we spent a lot of time on the edge actions. I just added a little round section to that bevel, and that's using the insert multi edge loop feature. And I'm just placing what I'm calling control loops to control the appearance of my edges. As you see, I'm placing these kind of far away. That should give me a nice smooth. I'm realizing that portion is underneath what's embedded here, so we actually won't see that. But extra practice never hurts. Alright. Insert a few edges here and there. Subdivide. See how things are looking. Let's go ahead and move on to another piece here. We're going to go ahead and move down to our poly group section. We can hit the auto group button. What auto groups will do is group individual pieces of meshes inside your subtool. I just hid and split that part so it's its own subtool now. Alright, so let's add some edge loops with insert edge. I had previously tested this piece and automatic creases doesn't work well, and plus creases tend to be a bit sharper than needed. You likely have to come back and apply a bit of smoothing, which is a valid workflow. Definitely do what what works best for you. Alright, just inserted a few bevels as well as a few more edges. And feel free to be really liberal with these. ZBrush can handle a lot. And these are still relatively low poly models. Alright, I like the way that came out. Okay, now I'm just gonna nudge that in there. Let's come to the base. I'm going to click the crease button. Get the automatic creases. I'm just gonna subdivide, see how it looks. Okay, might need to do a bit of cleanup in here. Hit divide again. Alright. So I'm looking in here. I'm just gonna undo those creases and just do some manual edge loops. Takes a little bit more time, but it works out. I just insetted that region because I couldn't insert a edge loop there. One here, and I'll just leave that side with no insert edge loop. Alright, just see how things are looking now. We're smoothing. The hole is smoothing better now. Let's come here and slide this edge. Insert an edge here. One here. Here. Okay. And I'm just going to unmask the bottom portion of the base. Control, click, and drag to extrude. And now I'm going to use the multi-edge loop insert to kind of create a rounded trim there. Okay. And I like the way that looks. Subdivide it. Let's come in here and add an edge loop there. Keep things tight when we subdivide. And that's so we have. Let's come to these rails now. Perform a few edits here. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I go to transforms and have symmetry on the z-axis. Now you could just come back and use mirror and weld later. That would work as well with this piece. Let's actually go ahead and turn that off on the z-axis and just do it across the x like so. And it seems like it went around at some points. Go to insert, multi-edge loop. We're gonna use those bevels to create some rounded trimming like we did before. And now just zooming in to do a closer, get a closer look at this. Alright, I'm gonna play with some of these values here, just seeing what each one to give us. I think radial looks pretty cool. Okay, and now let's go ahead and subdivide a few more times on that sub tool. And I think that's all our pieces there. And you can see with just a few tips, just masking and some ZModeler, we can really get a lot out of some primitives. Just gonna zoom in here and add another trim, one there. And just see how it looks. Okay. Another there. And move on. Back to this piece here. I'm trying to figure out what it needed to deform right when smoothing. And what it needed was a edge loop right here. And now it smooths way better. Okay, moving along. It's time to go ahead and place our moths. So each of these are on its own subtool. So I'm just control click and dragging to duplicate with our Gizmo 3D. You can do the same with the normal transpose tool. And I'm just placing these in general areas from the front view. Nothing too specific. Just place them around and figuring out if they're adding to the piece or not in that particular position. I'm just splitting these duplicates from the original onto their own subtool. This one I'm just going to start off by duplicating and turning off the original, so I don't have to worry about splitting later. Okay, just going to find the first spot for this one. It'll just be sitting right on top there. Okay, maybe on the edge. I like that. And duplicate over here. I'm going to try to kind of balance these from the front and the back. Just keep things well rounded. Okay. Control click and drag. I'll place this guy here, right on the wire. And later, once we're done, we can kind of come back and nudge them more into custom poses. Make sure their legs are kind of touching the base. Maybe tilt some wings. Okay. For right now, I'm just placing them in general locations. So grab this guy here. Let's go ahead and change my lighting. I like to see how things look a little bit different. So it's good to change your lighting and material from time to time. Okay, now with that set, let's go ahead and duplicate some more moths. I'm just going to unmask this one here. Duplicate, rotate, and just kind of line them up in the viewport. I'm going to edit its wing. Any small edits I can make to make them look a little bit more varied. So take this wing and just bend it a little bit. Change the angle. Tilt it. And I'm just saying for this one, nothing too different. Like so. And we could treat this one as another variant if we wanted and place them in a few places. But I definitely want to be strategic with the numbers of moths as well. So let's continue to pose this guy as if he's flying in to land. And this is the end result of our lantern here. Took some time to place a few more moths on the other side to kind of wrap things up. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next clip.